so whether the two members are just running a bit late, both the new members to the committee, so whether they've had difficulty in finding us, that may be the case. So hopefully they will join us as we go. So first of all, I'm Councillor Cathy Baton, and I was nominated on Monday to be the chair of this committee for the coming year from the main Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The nomination of chair for this meeting has to come from the ONS, and it has to be somebody who's a member of the ONS and in the opposite party to the mayor. So that's the procedural issues around that. So I'll be chairing this group for the coming year, and obviously all minutes get reported into the main Overview and Scrutiny Committee as well, and then forward onto the CA board. As I've said, I've received no apologies for absence. Councillor McGarity is joining on Teams, although Councillor McGarity is unwell this morning, so that's perfectly fine. Glad that you can join us on Teams. But normally we do need members to be in the room, given the change in the end of COVID legislation in terms of formal meetings. So move on to any declarations of interest, and just to remind people, any disclosable prejudicial interests they have in terms of any item being discussed during the course of the meeting. In addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value of it was thought to have exceeded £25 gifts or £40 hospitality. So do I have any declarations of interest? No? Super. Okay, so chair's remarks then. So it's the second time I've chaired this committee with a year's break. So I'd like to place on record my thanks to Councillor Clements as the outgoing chair for the work that she steered the committee through last year, but also congratulations to her on her appointment to Cabinet. Otherwise, I know she would have wanted to have continued here. So it's a welcome to the new members on Transport Scrutiny, and when we're about to start the agenda properly, I will ask everybody just to do a quick introduction of who they are and where they're represented, just so that we know. And for the new members, scrutiny is a statutory function that scrutinises the policy and strategy set by Transport for West Midlands for the region. And as I've said, we report this to the main Overview and Scrutiny Committee and to the main, and then into the CA board. So I think that's probably all I have to say. Now, the next item on the agenda is appointment of vice chair. Now, Dan, do you want to just explain the rules around vice chair as well, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it's similar, as you've explained at the start, to chair. So the vice chair is appointed by this committee, not the main Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So it's within your gift to appoint your vice chair. But obviously, is one of the responsibilities of the vice chair is to stand in for the chair in her absence. And that the chair of any scrutiny committee can't come from the same party as the mayor is. Again, it will need to be a Labour member of the subcommittee that will to be appointed as vice chair. Thanks,
Dan. Now, given that we are at least one Labour member down, well, two Labour members if you count Barbara, who's on screen, not present in the room. So I think, and given I was only nominated on Monday for the chair of this committee, I'm inclined, if the committee agrees, to defer the appointment of the vice chair to the next meeting, which will be September, and that will enable me to have a chat with the Labour members to see if anybody's got a specific interest in taking on the role of vice chair, and then we'll take that as an agenda item then, if that sits okay with the committee.
Just one question: you don't have any minority party members at all? Non-Labour, non-Conservative?
No, so there are on some of the committees on the Combined Authority, but on the Scrutiny Committee, no, it's that they're only Conservative and Labour members.
Okay. Good.
Okay, so is that okay with the committee if we defer that, taking that item till the next meeting? Okay, thank you. Now, before we move into the agenda properly, we've got a member of the public who's joined us this morning, Mr. Tim Weller from Hales Owen. Normally, we don't have an item on the agenda where we take questions from the public. But given the fact that the agenda is quite light today, and I've had a discussion with Tim prior to the meeting, I'm suggesting that Tim has 2 minutes to address the committee with his very specific request, which we will then hear and take a decision on after we've heard it. There won't be any Transport for West Midlands officers present who are going to be able to respond to Tim today, and Tim's aware of that. So Tim, you'll have 2 minutes if you want to address the committee.
I'm an independent environmentalist and a transport watchdog, and I want you councillors, the members of the Combined Authority and the 7 constituent councils, to make policy which you then ensure is implemented or are implemented by the officers. Now, I'm asking if you might make a slight change in policy so that the Wednesbury Briley Hill extension, the metro, continues along the railway line from Dudley, Castle Hill, down onto the mainline railway between Worcester, Dudley and Derby at Cinderbank roundabout, where it will continue to Harts Hill tram stop. But from there, it's due to leave the railway line to go into the waterfront and Merry Hill. But as I see it, the problem is that there is a 400-metre wide canal embankment that takes Dudley's #1 premier canal. And it's a lovely public open space. It's the nearest thing that Merry Hill has to a nature reserve. I've got my landscape enhancement scheme at one end against the iron wall, which holds up the high plateau, which is designated for residential development. And the metro, if you continue with your current policy of putting the tram across this 400-metre embankment, will take quite a large corner of that land, that brownfield site that's desperately needed for housing. And I'm suggesting that you keep the tram on the railway line. It still could have a tram stop at Briley Hill, another one at Withymoor, and then end up at Stourbridge Junction, which joins up with the National Railway Network. And you would also save £100 million, because that is the cost for a concrete and steel double track, standard gauge track. So it's like a railway line, in fact, that you're going to be building across that steep embankment. And that's why it's going to be £100 million, I think, including the 2 bridges to take the tram over the canal from the railway line and then over the canal a second time to take it into Cottage Street at Briley Hill. So please, you know, with or without me being present, talk about it amongst yourselves if you could. And if you're able to agree with me that you could save £100 million at this time of dire financial constraints upon you all and upon us all, that you're considering the tram staying on the railway line all the way into Stourbridge, and that would save the trees, the wildlife site, the nature reservation, and my landscape enhancement scheme that I would love you to take a look at sometime. Go there and see for yourself what I've done with shrubs and trees and ivy growing up that rusty, corroded iron wall that holds up this brownfield housing site. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, so we've heard Tim's submission. We will take that because it isn't an agenda item today, and we obviously don't have technical detail, and we will deal with that via Transport for West Midlands officers, and we'll take that back as a request for them to report back to this committee on. Lindsay, if you've taken it. Yeah. Thanks.
Can I ask, are there any questions from members? Is there anything that you want clarification on, perhaps?
No.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
we've got that, and obviously I know you and where you are.
Yeah.
So if anybody does have any questions, they can come through and I'll correspond with yourself.
I've got to say, I do agree you're on brownfield being used for housing. That's one thing that is my biggest. So I do agree you're on that.
Oh, good. Thanks very much indeed.
All right.
Thanks, Catherine.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, so that moves on with the agenda, and if I can ask for that to be reported back to us on Team's proposals. If we can have a full report back on that from officers who have the technical knowledge in, you know, which we can all discuss it, we can have an opinion on it, but without the technical knowledge in terms of building and everything else, we can't, I don't believe we're in a position to comment.
That's right.
Okay, so just before we move on to the minutes, do you want to do just a quick round of introductions as to who people are? Because I was hoping the other members might have joined us by now, but they haven't. So if I can just do a quick run round the table.
Yeah, I'm Dan Essex. I'm the Governance Services Manager at the Combined Authority.
I'm Councillor John Lord from Birmingham City Council.
Councillor Martin McCarthy from Solihull, Metropolitan Borough Council.
Councillor View Waters, Walsall, kept Metropolitan Council. Give me 2 weeks.
Councillor Karen Sims, Sandwell. Kate Taylor, Head of Finance, Business Partnering and Strategic Planning for the Combined Authority.
And Lindsay Roberts, Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority.
Councillor Cathy Baton, Association of Black Country Authorities representative, and from Dudley MBC.
And Councillor Barbara McGarty, Wolverhampton Council.
Thank you. Do you want to go around? Debbie, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yes, I'm Debbie Dimmock. I'm a solicitor working with Satish Mystery, specialising in governance.
Thank you. Stand to yourself, Graham.
Graham Jones, I'm the Technical Director for TFWM for the Commonwealth Games.
And Jodie.
Good morning, committee. My name is Jodie Townsend. I'm a governance consultant supporting Satish with the work on the Transport Governance Review, and also supporting a number of other combined authorities on other governance reviews at this moment in time.
Thank you. Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire Buller. I'm an interim governance advisor just supporting Satish and just here to listen into the item today.
Thank you. Satish.
Good morning, members. My name is Satish Mystery. I'm the interim director of Law and Governance.
Okay, thanks very much. So back to the agenda then, if we take the minutes of the 23rd of March for those members who were part of that meeting, they were agreed at, they were noted at overview and scrutiny meeting, and both of yourselves were present at that meeting and felt that they were accurate and a true record of that meeting. So can I have committee's agreement then that they're true and accurate?
Agreed.
Thank you. And are there any matters arising from that particular, those minutes? If I take it page by page, so page 1, were there any matters arising from that? Page 2. Page 3. 4. And 5. No? Okay, thank you for that. We have moved the agenda around very slightly today. So Satish had asked if he could present his item first on governance. So I've agreed that because he had to leave. So Satish, over to yourself if you'd like to present your item, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this item is to provide members with an update on the Transport Governance Review. Chair, you will be aware that as a result of a piece of work that the Mayor and Met leaders requested last year, we've been undertaking an overall review of governance in the authority, which was reported in November 2021. And that set out various recommendations in relation to improving governance at the authority. So we've been doing quite a bit of work in terms of streamlining decision making, the quality of reports, how our forward plan works. We've also set up the Economic Governance Board, which has been operating quite effectively, and currently have just completed some work on the allowances for members, which will be reported in September. So one of the key bits of work that's been done at the moment is a review of transport governance, which was commissioned early part of this year, and we're quite keen to update members in relation to how far we've got with that. The intention is to continue the work and to outline the results of the review at board in November of this year. So that's the intention. So we've just sort of brought together what the current sort of findings are in relation to that. If you look at Appendix 1 of the report, it sets out the sort of background to the Transport Governance Review, and it's been sort of it's led by myself and Anne Shaw, who unfortunately is not able to be here today, but we've jointly commissioned it, and the work is being done by Jodie externally and Debbie in particular, my end. So there's quite a few interviews and things that have taken place as some issues are emerging. So I would let Jodie take you through that. And then the second thing I'd like to do is Debbie's done some comparative work in relation to how transport governance operates at Manchester and West Yorkshire as well. So if we could do it in those two parts, if Jodie could just outline how far we've got in relation to the transport governance review, and then Debbie will do the comparative stuff if you're happy with that, Chair.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Jodie.
Thank you, Satish, and good morning, committee. So we're still at the early stages of the review. We've undertaken initial interviews. I'll run through those shortly, and started to review documentation. We've also been doing a governance mapping exercise. I don't know if for some of those older members who've been at the Combined Authority for a while, you may recall the mind-blowing governance map that I pulled together for the governance review last year. And I'm finding that there are bodies and committees on the in the governance mapping exercise at the moment that were not identified then, and so that map is very large from a transport perspective. We've also undertaken a number of interviews. These interviews at the moment have been used to try to identify key themes or key barriers to delivering effective governance within transport. I've spoken to almost the entire TFWM leadership team, including Anne Shaw. Pete Bond has been my lead contact on that, and I've spoken to him on numerous occasions. And I have to say, Peter's been exceptionally helpful so far in regards to the review. We've held an interview with the portfolio lead for transport, the mayor, with the chief executive, and your previous chair of this committee as well, when the review was kicked off, to try and identify some of those emerging key themes. We still have interviews to arrange and to undertake, particularly in regards to the Metro and Bus Alliance side, where I feel like we do need more information. And I'm due to speak to the chair of the Transport Delivery Committee. And obviously, I'll be looking to speak to yourself, Councillor Bain, as the new chair of this committee, as part of this review in the sort of coming weeks or month. The emerging key themes. So these are topics that have been identified consistently in interviews to date. And I can reflect on some of the opinions and views given on some of these if required. The first of those is benefits of a mayoral portfolio. This stems from obviously analysis with Greater Manchester, where the mayor there obviously holds the transport portfolio as part of the position. We've had a conversation with particularly the portfolio lead and the mayor and the chief executive here about their views on that, and how that sort of operates at Manchester, and what the potential benefits and the potential negatives of a mayoral portfolio holding transport could potentially be. I think it's fair to say at this moment in time in the review, there is very little support for such a proposal, but obviously there's more work to develop and look at in regards to that. We've been looking at the Strategic Transport Board. Obviously that's a non-constituted body at this moment in time, made up in theory of the cabinet member leads for transport from the various constituent authorities. I think it's fair to say it seems to be a bit of an anomaly that transport doesn't fit into the generic model of the Combined Authorities governance at this moment in time with a constituted board, whether that is a delegated committee or decision-making body or an advisory body. It is not obviously a constituted part of that structure. So we've been having conversations with the portfolio lead for transport in particular, as well as officers around that. And we are due, hopefully as well, to speak to members of the Strategic Transport Board to get some further evidence from them around the benefits of constituting that body and how they could play a more active role potentially in the development of strategy and policy in regards to transport portfolio. We've been looking at the current delegations across transport and whether they are appropriate. There's a lot more work to do on this. That is an element that has only just begun. Clarity around roles and responsibilities. I think that's a key theme that has been raised in every single conversation I've had so far. And it was also, of course, one of those key themes we were asked to take on board from the previous review of governance last year, where they felt there was issues around clarity of roles and responsibilities across portfolios, but in particular in relation to transport. Clarity around the roles and responsibility of TDC was one of those key concerns, and obviously we're looking into that in some detail, the roles, responsibilities, whether those roles fit appropriately with TDC, whether they could fit more appropriately elsewhere, whether there's a need to reform TDC, whether there's even a need for TDC. So there's lots of things sort of being considered as part of that process. Overview and scrutiny focus is another one. Obviously, combined authority scrutiny is supposed to be distinct from local authority scrutiny in that it is supposed to have a far more strategic focus. So how can we bring that forward in the transport sphere at West Midlands? Are there key West Midlands themes that the transport scrutiny function or the scrutiny committee itself may want to focus on and look to make sure they're holding people to account to, or making sure that are being delivered across policy? And then this leads into some of the other bits at the end, which I just want to make a particular mention of, which is decision making, but not just in relation to transport, but in relation to the combined authority as a whole. And is the decision making at this moment in time integrated? So is transport decision making considering metro, rail, bus, cycle, walk, etc., a big whole picture when it's making decisions and making policy suggestions?
Lost you, Josie.
Oh, can you hear me now? Hello?
No, I still can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back. Yep.
I'm back. I do apologise for that. It must be my internet connection. Apologies. I was just talking about integrated decision making and the role within transport to ensure that integrated decision making across all modes of transport are being considered when transport decision making is taking place, and from a combined authority perspective, ensuring that integrated decision making across all portfolio areas are being considered when decisions are making place. Obviously, when making transport decisions, key ones, there will be knock-on implications or opportunities in relation to all other areas such as housing, crime, etc. And what are we doing as an organisation to make sure we have an integrated approach to that? So that's where we are at this moment in time. I'm hoping to finish the mapping exercise within the next 1 to 2 weeks. I've managed to get my head around the very complicated rail governance arrangements. Now looking to get our head around the I would say again quite complicated metro governance arrangements, and obviously lay that all out alongside bus and the combined authorities formal governance arrangements as well. But to date, I would say the review has been very well received from all of those that we've spoken to. And we'll obviously be looking to develop proposals and then test those proposals in future conversations with key individuals as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. I have been working on looking at comparisons between West Midlands Combined Authority and Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We chose those authorities as the ones that are most comparable to West Midlands Combined Authority in size and in functions. Looking first at West Yorkshire Combined Authority, it was very interesting that they had themselves just completed a similar review of their transport governance. They had started with the same issues that had been identified within West Midlands, a lack of clarity of roles, a lack of engagement with the constituent authorities, and a lack of clarity between particularly the roles of their transport committee and their transport scrutiny function. So looking at what the results of their review, they've completed their review now, and one of the things that they have done is that they have looked at the way of bringing the portfolio leads for transport from the constituent authorities into the governance arrangements for the combined authority. And we've talked about the anomaly at the moment of the Strategic Transport Board, which is seen as a very effective consultative body, but of course has no formal status at this point. And that is a body made up of the portfolio leads for transport for the constituent authorities. the role or the route that West Yorkshire has gone down is to take their existing transport committee and enlarge it to include the portfolio leads for each of the constituent authorities, and to make sure that in future the role of the chair is actually held by the lead portfolio for transport for the combined authority, so that the governance of transport is very closely linked both with the combined authorities and with the constituent authorities. They've also decided to have very defined roles set out as a role profile for each of the members of their transport committee. So identifying their role both in relation to the combined authority, but also as representatives of their constituent authority, bringing their concerns from their local area into the combined authority, but also acting for the combined authority in their own constituents. So providing a very effective conduit between the two organisations. So, and they have set that out actually in the Constitution in roles that are set out formally. So another objective of their review was to identify and make clear the difference in roles between the actual Transport Committee and their Transport Scrutiny Committee. And what they have done is to make clear the delegation of functions to the Transport Committee. The Transport Committee now has a much clearer, fully delegated role in relation to transport functions, so that it is clearly a decision-making body. Whereas obviously the scrutiny has a statutory function of review. And to clarify this further, they have included in the Constitution that the scrutiny has a role of scrutinising the decisions of the Transport Committee, so that basically it acts in the same way as in relation to the Transport Committee as it does to the board as a whole. Moving on to Greater Manchester, again, that is interesting in that it is a very different setup altogether. Greater Manchester has set up what is known as a joint committee, which is a legal entity in itself. So they have set up a joint committee of the combined authority, the mayor, and all the constituent authorities. And they have delegated to that combined authority, to that joint committee, the functions of the mayor, functions of the combined authority in relation to transport within a certain budget, and also the highway functions of the constituent authorities, so that it has a much wider remit across the whole of the region, and has an ability to coordinate functions across transport and across highways. But that is because it is a joint committee and an entity in itself, which can take delegations from all of those bodies. The membership of that is then the mayor, the portfolio leads for all the constituent authorities, and 6 members appointed by the mayor. So again, that is a very different but a very powerful body, a full decision-making body in relation to all aspects of transport. As far as scrutiny is concerned, the combined authority don't have a transport scrutiny committee. They have 3 cross-cutting themes. They have one for corporate issues and reform, economy, business and growth, skills and housing, and planning and environment. And they're all cross-cutting, so they will look at transport themes within their remit, so that zero carbon electricity generation will be looked at in the appropriate committee, and clean air zones in another. So that is the information that I have gleaned from the review of these other authorities, and these we will take sort of lessons learned from this and put forward proposals to the governance review as to how the arrangements in West Midlands can learn lessons from these different arrangements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Satish, is there anything you want to sum up on before I?
Yes, just very briefly, Chair. I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, it's sort of early days, but it's quite interesting that I think one of the key issues that's coming out is whether we have a formal board for transport in the way that we have for economic governance. And I think we have it in the form of the STB, right? But I think it probably we just need to consider whether we should sort of make that a formal board. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think there are some issues about overlaps in relation to TDC, scrutiny, main scrutiny and transport scrutiny itself, which I think we just need to think through and rationalise, because I think some of those roles do overlap and sometimes conflict a little bit. So that's another area. The other thing I should just say is at the discussion at the Mayor and Met leaders recently, they did want to also consider member oversight of external entities like MMA and MML as well. So one of the things that they have asked us to look at is just to sort of see whether we can improve the member oversight in relation to those two bodies. And it may be that that might be something that we can do as part of just looking at the overlaps in relation to some of those other areas. So that's, I think, all I had to say, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So I'll open it up to the committee. If you've got, in terms of your questioning, if there's something that's one of the officers has raised, if you direct it straight to that officer, I think that might be the easiest. So do I have anybody who wants to ask a question? Councillor McCarthy?
Oh, although I've been asked to direct it to a specific officer, I think this is a little bit broader than that. I welcome responses from any of the project team on this. I very much commend the intentions of this project to give us some consistency of role between the different combined authorities, because that's essential for development of people, and quite often people move about, particularly officers and other people. But is it your intention to, this is very much what I would call a benchmarking exercise. Do you intend to report some detailed gap analysis of the approaches taken by? It's a very good, powerful way of reporting it out. What are your views on that?
Chair, shall I deal with that?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I think, Chair, I think our intention is to do a wide-scale review of the governance arrangements without anything holding us back, in a sense, right? So obviously we're looking at Manchester and West Yorkshire, but that's for comparative purposes. So we just want to make sure that the governance, member level governance at West Midlands is as transparent, streamlined and efficient as possible. And I think it's safe to say that that's probably not the position at the moment. And the reason for that is twofold. One is because we've inherited some structures from the old transport entity, lock, stock and barrel. So we just took that over when the CA was set up. And then what the CA's done is they've added various layers to the decision-making arrangement. So nobody's really properly, before we picked this piece of work up, looked at it from a sort of strategic angle, in a sense. So to answer the member's question, we do want to have a sort of proper review of this. The gaps will come out as part of that. We'll look at comparative information, but what's right for us needs to be specific in that context.
Yeah.
So the intention is to compare the two authorities you mentioned, but not to compare the outcome of that with the way that West Midlands runs.
And absolutely not. Absolutely, we're unique in many ways. We're very unique, but we just need to learn the lessons of how they operate and how they review their arrangements.
Okay,
Are you satisfied with that response?
well, not entirely, no.
Is there anything you want to come back on at this point, or do you want to see how the conversation develops?
No, yeah, I'd like to see how the conversation develops. I'm just sort of very much putting a stake in the ground to say, well, what are we going to, what are our intentions for an outcome from this piece of work? Because I still think that that's unclear if it's just comparing to other authorities and not triangulating.
Yes, yeah. Chair,
To
can I just
for the
yeah, Chair, forgive me if I haven't been clearer. Our intention is to, in a very objective way, to streamline the decision-making arrangements at member level on transport at the CA. Okay, to make it as transparent and as accountable and as efficient as possible. So that's what our intentions are.
I've got Jodie wanting to come back on this item, and Barbara also indicating. So Jodie, if you want to come back on this item.
Yeah, if it's helpful, on top of what Satish has just said, the intention is also obviously to pick up whatever we can learn from West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and elsewhere. Obviously looking at other elements of best practice as well from CFGS and others, and looking at things like foundations and fundamentals of good governance, the framework and the structure, and actually just trying to come up with proposals that will also hopefully lead to more effective decision making within transport. So as well as the streamlining and efficiency, also what can we do to make transport decision making more effective? And of course that includes obviously what can we do to make it more accountable, and those accountability arrangements around that and challenge as well. So I just thought that was important to understand in regards to the councillor's question.
Okay. Councillor McGarity.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point really. I mean, it's interesting to compare the two authorities, but obviously Manchester I know is Labour, West Yorkshire I'm not sure. But I wondered about the difference between those two actually. Like I say, I'm not sure what West Yorkshire is, whether it's Labour or Conservative, but I'm not sure that I want all my eggs to be going into one basket, if you like, i.e., we've got Andy Street. I don't want him to take it personally. I don't want him to take all the decision making things that happens in Manchester, because I think that could be a little bit risky. That's my own personal view.
Thank you. Mark, who wants to take that?
Debbie?
Yes, I'm happy to say that. First of all, they are very different authorities. I think to take Greater Manchester, the Mayor has specific functions in relation to transport, which isn't the case in West Midlands, so that we would not be following that role particularly, because the Mayor does not have designated functions in relation to transport here, whereas Andy Burnham very clearly does have that in Manchester. West Yorkshire is a similar authority to West Midlands, but the Mayor, Tracy Brabant, is in fact a Labour member. But the interesting thing about West Yorkshire is that, like the West Midlands, the integrated transport authority that existed before the combined authority was dissolved in the same way as it was for West Midlands Combined Authority, and the functions were taken into the authority, and that isn't the case for Greater Manchester. Transport for Greater Manchester still exists as a separate entity. So again, there is a difference there. So obviously we would be taking some lessons from the way other organisations operate, but very much applying them to the West Midlands situation and what members feel is best for the West Midlands. But there are some interesting analogies, and one of the things that was interesting was that they were, particularly in the West Yorkshire, battling with the same issues that we have here of lack of clarity of role, and also a disjunction between the combined authority and the constituent authorities, and the way that they have resolved that by bringing in the portfolio leads from the constituent authorities into a defined part of the decision-making system, which at the moment, although we have set up a strategic transport board with the portfolio leads from the constituent authorities, it is not a decision-making part of West Midlands Combined Authority. It hasn't got any delegated functions, and it doesn't fall within the constitution at this point in time. So that would be one of the things that this review will want to look at, as to whether that should form part of the decision-making body in some way or another.
Do you want to come back?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I've got Councillor Waters next.
This is to Satish. You said streamline. Is there any progress on what you mean by streamline? Have you made any progress, or are you just looking at the actual other authorities you've actually been to actually put a paper together to see what we can do and what we can't do, or what we are, what's going to work for us that isn't working for them?
Yes, well, by streamlining, I mean the less amount of duplication that there is between the various entities, as well as those entities being able to make quick, swift decisions, with some scrutiny, obviously, but as quickly as possible. And I think our delegations, if you ever have occasion to look at some of this, it's unwieldy, and I think it just needs reviewing. So I think the intention will be to make this much more sort of faster.
Jodie?
And just on top of that, some of that streamlining, which is what happened with the previous governance review, is about the informal governance bodies and mechanisms that feed into your formal combined authority governance structure. So the mapping exercise we're undertaking at the moment is revealing there are tens and tens of bodies or groups that feed into the decision-making process in some way, shape or form in the West Midlands. Some of those are bus specific, rail specific, metro specific, cycling, walking, and some of them there may be some duplication as well. So it's about making sure that that informal governance structure is effective and efficient as possible to better inform your formal decision-making and your formal scrutiny process at the combined authority.
I agree with that.
Do I have any other questions before I come in with some questions and observations? Yeah, Councillor.
Could you, Jodie Townsend, could you just define give me your definition of member in this context, please?
So when I refer to so member-led is the political members, appointees of the combined authority. So I'm thinking of councillors, and I'm thinking of obviously the mayor.
So you're seeing those as all the same?
Not all the same.
And some of them elected.
Yeah, so they obviously have distinct roles within the combined authority setting. Obviously, the mayor has a particular role and particular delegations. The strategic transport board again is made up of obviously lead members from the constituent authorities, but they're not necessarily appointed to a constituent board like we have with some of our other elements of the governance structure. And of course, we have our council leaders, who of course are portfolio leads and board members. So there is a various selection of distinct roles across that member sphere.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions first for Debbie. So the West Yorkshire model, and you've said they have an overview and scrutiny committee. Is that just one committee, or do they have a subcommittee, or does the one overview and scrutiny committee cover all of their scrutiny functions?
I think they have a separate scrutiny, a transport scrutiny committee. I'm just having a look. I have compared them all. I think from recollection, they did have a separate scrutiny, transport scrutiny committee. I think they had three scrutiny committees, one of which was transport, but I couldn't be sure on that.
If it's helpful, I believe they have an economy committee, a corporate committee, and I think they have a separate transport scrutiny committee.
Thank you for that. I've got a question on the arrangements at Greater Manchester.
Yes.
So you've said that for their scrutiny they have 3 cross-cutting themes and that transport is a recurrent theme through each one of their committees.
Yes.
So for example, our scrutiny committee the overview and scrutiny committee and the combined transport committee will look at the budget, where we call the mayor and portfolio holder in to respond to question time. How would that arrangement work in Greater Manchester? Obviously, transport budget, well, for us is the largest budget. So how do they ensure effective oversight and scrutiny of the transport budget if transport straddles all of their scrutiny functions?
I don't know whether Jodie can answer that better than I can.
Apologies, I'm slightly laughing at that. I think the need for Greater Manchester to have a very detailed Centre for Governance and Scrutiny examination of their scrutiny arrangements in the past 4 months may give you an answer that perhaps they have not been successfully delivering that function. I think it's fair to say that personally, I was involved in that review, and I would say Greater Manchester could learn far more from the West Midlands than vice versa.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I suppose it just helps to clarify some of the thoughts about where we may be heading and about the options that are available and open to us.
I mean, if it's helpful, Chair, their model was set up, as I understand it, to try and address the question of integrated decision making and integrated policy development. I think they had a concern that transport policy was very much being developed in isolation, and by having it shared across various sort of work streams or committees, it gave an opportunity then for them to push consideration about housing needs, etc., wider. So they were making more integrated decision making and more integrated accountability. But I think it's fair to say they've had quite limited success with that.
Okay. Satish?
Just to say, Chair, that I think one area where we don't need to learn any lessons from Manchester is probably on scrutiny, actually, right? Because I think the scrutiny arrangements at the West Midlands, generally speaking, not just on transport, are actually much stronger than Manchester. One of the reasons for that is because of the different political makeup of Manchester and West Midlands. So I think our scrutiny is much more stronger.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
Yeah, could I ask that you run one particular thread through your work for us, perhaps, or consider including a thread? There's a thread that goes through to the way that we're perceived on the street by the people that put us where we are. And that is that when suddenly they're told that a service is stopping. Could you look at how each authority deals with that? Because we don't seem to have any control over that at the moment.
Who would like to take that question? Satish?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, I think the arrangements for delivery of services like the Metro, for instance, is in the hands of MML. Okay, so they're responsible for delivery of the service and safety issues in relation to that. We have oversight as the owners, in a sense. We also have some representation on the board in relation to that. We're going to strengthen the arrangements on the board in terms of having more independent people on the board as well. So I think it certainly does need strengthening. As I was saying earlier on, the Mayor and Met leaders have asked for us to look at the member oversight in relation to MMA and MML as well. So we are hoping to do an options paper for this at the September board, which just looks at what sort of options there may be in relation to that, which then will be fed into the transport governance review for November.
You want to come
If I
back on
could
that?
just come back briefly. The thread is, as the members will somewhat ruefully know, tends to be specifically aimed at bus services, because they're the things that disappear from groups of 2,500 people at a time. And that's where we don't feel that we have any influence on what influences many lives and their connectivity to the whole system severely. It's a good example, in my view, it's a good way of running the rabbit through the work that we're doing to see whether it's making a difference to anyone.
Satish, do you want to respond? And then I've got Linda Horn, who's just joined the meeting. She's also wants to make a comment. So Satish, do you want to come first?
No, I was just going to say that it may be that Linda's got something to add to the point that's been made. So no, that would be useful.
Okay, Linda.
Sorry, it was just to say from a hi, and Linda Horn, the Finance Director of the Combined Authority. But just to add, obviously from a bus perspective, we are in a deregulated market, which means the majority of the network is run on a commercial basis, and we have no influence of where those buses run. The only we do have a sort of partnership arrangement where we talk to the bus operators in negotiation. A lot of the conversation therefore happens through the TDC committee around certain bus routes, etc. But what we do is regular bus network reviews, and we're starting one again now, because obviously the bus network has been severely impacted by the pandemic. We need to take a fresh look at that network. The bus industry itself is suffering huge losses in terms of commercial revenue at the minute, or so they say.
And I think we've got a little bit off path of the question, perhaps. In the context of this piece of work, I wanted to use that thread in the comparison between the other two authorities and the triangulation with ourselves, see how they deal with what is a problem across the UK.
Yeah, so we can certainly,
we can certainly. The criticism of what happens here, it just said, could you run this thread as a diagnostic tool?
I think we can certainly take that away and look at how, when we look to influence the bus network, we bring that through overview and scrutiny committee, and we can look how Manchester and West Yorkshire,
that's the key thing,
do that as well.
Yeah.
But actually, nationally, Manchester and West Yorkshire will be in the same position as us, in that we don't actually have direct control over the bus network.
Well, that would be a conclusion that might come out of this piece of work, but we can't sort of predispose the outcome of asking those questions. And I'd just like to use this opportunity to get some answers in that. If that's clear, then it is a proper conclusion itself, which we can then talk about separately.
Yes, so the bus network will be reported through TDC, but we will look at that in the context of how we're managing it and reporting it through, in the context of how Manchester and West Yorkshire do it then. Yeah.
I think probably from a scrutiny perspective, the important thing is to keep the strategic oversight rather than necessarily the detail that TDC may receive, not come on to ask some questions around the separation of the work that TDC undertake versus scrutiny undertaking. I'll come to yourself, Councillor Waters, and then I'll come back, so I've got another couple of questions. So, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I don't know if anybody who can actually answer this. I believe the Combined Authority actually does some subsidies to some bus services due to the area being high deprivation. So they do have a bit of control over certain bus services, the amount of buses which go in a certain area, because it's actually subsidised. So I mean, in Warsaw, we've got 2 routes that are actually running, Diamond are running and National Express are running.
Yep.
Yes, so as I said, the majority of the network, we're in a deregulated market, the majority of the network is run on a commercial basis. We, however, as the Combined Authority, have what we call bus accessibility standards, which means that everybody has to be within 400 metres of a bus stop. Everybody has to be in so many minutes of having a bus that goes past them within that 400 metres. And where the commercial network doesn't allow that to happen, where there are gaps in that network, the Combined Authority subsidises those bus services on there. So that's where we come in and we step in and plug gaps in the commercial market where the bus operator wouldn't run them because they're not value for money, they're not commercially profitable for them. And the way that that's managed is obviously we have an annual subsidised bus budget. I think it's about, Kate can correct me now, about 9-10 million a year. That is under some pressure at the minute because obviously commercially bus operators need to do registry services. The way that that is managed through governance is that there's oversight through the access standards are set by the Combined Authority. The officers plug the network, fulfilling those access standards. And again, we give regular updates via TDC on how that's performing.
Thanks. So I've got a question for Jodie, and it is around the issues around duplication of work and clarity of roles between TDC and transport and the current arrangement with Transport Scrutiny. So as part of your evidence, Jodie, have you received any evidence in terms of reports about reports that might go to TDC that actually probably should come to Transport Scrutiny instead because they're possibly more policy papers, or they are more strategic overview papers? So I think where I'm coming from is that the importance for me from a scrutiny perspective is that officers are understanding where their papers need to be directed. And do we have that understanding at this moment in time? So, you know, you'll look at our scrutiny work programme and it's quite light for the year. You look at Transport Delivery Committee's work programme and it's quite heavy. Now, how many of those papers actually are policy papers that should be coming to Transport Scrutiny for oversight of re-decision scrutiny and really would only go to Transport Delivery Committee for noting? Has that evidence at this point been looked at? I appreciate to date you've done a lot of interviews, so you may not have looked at that point yet.
So in answer to that, in regards to the specifics, that work has not yet been undertaken, but I can make a comment on it because it is a topic that has been raised during conversations with TFWM officers as part of the review, and an open admittance amongst themselves that they're not always clear on the direction of where some of those reports go. There's a feeling, I think, that maybe the TDC are looking at certain performance reports that maybe don't quite fall within the remit of TDC. There's been a view expressed, for example, that STB should be receiving some of the policy discussions that have been again taking place at TDC. And so it's definitely a topic for further review and investigation, but that detailed work at this moment in time has not been started.
Okay, so I'm confident then that you will be undertaking that detailed work, because without it, you're not going to be able to create roles and responsibilities for the relevant boards and how they may look in the future. So thank you for that. Do I have any other questions from anybody else?
Yeah, somebody from the TDC for several TDC for over 20 odd years, and I've seen the changes where it was a combined Western Transport Authority, Integrated Transport Authority. It's a real job to do at the moment. Now, recently, I found out reports are for noting only, so it's not serving any purpose. It's not taking, so are they doing a useful purpose, or putting these on agenda when there's no meaningful consultation or input they can make? They can't make any add value to it. So there's some, so there is relevance and duplication of between the what the current TDC does and what I think the subcommittee does at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really where the point I was picking up before was that we really need that clarity and for officers to understand where their papers need to sit. And just reiterating, obviously, that scrutiny is the statutory function, whatever a Transport Delivery Committee might look like or however it might isn't at this moment in time. So it's just making sure that officers get the right route for their papers. Satish?
Yes, Chair, I just wanted to say that this is actually a key part of the work which we will need to do, because the whole purpose of the review, which is common to other reviews that we've done, for instance, on economic governance, is to try and streamline and to limit the sort of amount of times that officers have to go to member level decision-making entities, but that when they do, they're the right entities that are appropriate for making those decisions. So the issues that have been raised by yourself and other members in relation to the overlaps between TDC's Scrutiny and the Strategic Transport Board, they're all very appropriate. And I think when one looks at the terms of reference of those as well, it's somewhat confusing as to where something goes. So I would like to think that one of the outcomes of this will be a streamlined sense of delegations in relation to those entities.
Okay, thank you. And I would just like to flag up, I think, at this moment in time, and it's possibly relevant for you to bear in mind as you're conducting the review, is that obviously the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee was born out of a piece of work that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee undertook a while ago. And part of that not only was based on the governance and the oversight, but actually that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has a huge workload and was unable to do justification to transport scrutiny. And I don't think that's changed. So I think in terms of how the way you streamline or the way the recommendations that you make, I think that still has to be borne in mind, because for one committee and we've seen, you know, we've got the evidence from Greater Manchester and from West Yorkshire that what just one Overview and Scrutiny Committee doing the whole remit of the CA is a massive workload, and we couldn't undertake the transport scrutiny effectively. So I'd just like to make sure that that's borne in mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll wait to be updated at the next. Did you say it was going to board in November?
That's the intention, that we will take it to November board.
I mean, I think given the fact that this is obviously a scrutiny committee, it would be helpful perhaps for us to have some pre-decision scrutiny of it. So I'm not sure whether it fits in with the timetable of meetings, Lindsay, but if it does, if we can have some pre-decision scrutiny on this.
Yes, so there's a meeting of the committee on the 10th of November.
And the board meetings when?
We've got a date. Do you know, Dan, the date of November's CA board?
But I will tell you.
It's all right.
If I don't wait.
Okay, so if as long as it fits in the time frame, I would like it to come to the Transport Scrutiny Committee before it goes to board, if that's possible, please, so that we can have some pre-decision scrutiny on it.
No, absolutely, Chair. And thank you for members' comments in relation to it. It's very useful, actually, to have that discussion. We'll certainly feed that in the review.
Oh, okay, so Dan's confirmed it's the 18th, so board's on the 18th of November, so that's fine. Okay, thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move back then to item number 7, and that's the Commonwealth Games transport update, and that's Graham who's delivering that. Graham, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a presentation which I'll put up on the screen if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, just as a general comment, I think we received the presentation quite late last night, so members may not have had the opportunity to look at it. And I would make this request to all officers that if presentations are to be sent out, they're sent out well in advance of the meeting in future.
Okay. Can I just check out how much time you've set aside for this item, Chair?
We've got quite a light agenda, so I think we're probably okay for about half an hour. We've got one private item for the agenda, which we will move into private session for. So I think half an hour is fine.
Okay, great. And can I just check you can see that on the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I'm just going to give you a quick overview. Talk through the operational plan as it relates to Transport for West Midlands, a quick look at our readiness and contingency plans, how we're going to deal with operational control, and then I'll just talk very briefly at the end about the biggest challenge, which is for us the opening ceremony. In terms of an overview then, it's been heralded as a history-making games. It's the biggest sports programme in Commonwealth Games history. There are more medals for women than men in this event. There's more parasports than ever before, and this is different to Olympics and Paralympics. We have the parasports mixed in with the normal programme. And it's aiming to be the first Commonwealth Games to create a carbon neutral legacy. A reminder then of the 19 sports. There are 8 parasports, and those are designated by the small p in the top right-hand corner. So aquatics, athletics, basketball, etc. And you can see it's a very varied programme of sports across the days of the event. In terms of the venues, I suspect everybody's fairly familiar with these now. They extend from Cannock Chase in the north down to Leamington and Warwick for the lawn bowls and the cycling road race. And then the track cycling is also at the velodrome in the Olympic Park in London. We've got worth noting that we've got 4 different athlete villages. One of the casualties, if you like, of the pandemic was a risk to completion of the athletes village at Perry Bar. So we moved to a 3 or 4 venue location using existing already built accommodation, mostly student accommodation, but also hotels at NEC and Park Regis in the city centre. And that has added some complexity to the transport plan, a lot more movements across the city on a lot more roads because of that. You might expect that with 4 different villages, we were able to put athletes closest to their venue. So University of Warwick, you might expect that judo and rugby teams and wrestling would be there. But unfortunately, what happens is that the teams stay generally within their countries. So the Australian team like to stay together, the Canadian team like to stay together, which means it's quite a network of movement across the city. The Games Transport Plan is the statutory plan that comes under the Commonwealth Games Act. The Combined Authority were directed to prepare it by the Secretary of State, and we brought it to this committee on the 24th of November last year. It subsequently went to TDC on the 10th of January, and it was signed off finally by the board on the 14th of January of this year. And it is a statutory plan. I think it's the only statutory plan under the Games Act. And as a result, there's copies sitting in the libraries at both House of Commons and House of Lords. So it's a significant document, and it sets out the core principles and some of the tactical detail around how we were going to deliver transport for the Games. So the 5 core principles are there on the right: clean and green are public transport games, safe, secure and reliable, minimising disruption, particularly to residents and businesses, and the city needs to operate at the same time. Trying to ensure as much as possible that there was sustainable options and legacy from the Games. And importantly, at the bottom there, access for all, to make sure that the access was available for everybody, regardless of their situation. I'll just talk then about Spectator and workforce transport. This is one of the big areas of delivery that TFWM has been responsible for. In terms of planning that, as you might expect, we need to know first of all where people are coming from, and this map might surprise you a little. I'm not sure, but the bulk of people, over 60% of people, are coming from within the West Midlands and the neighbouring Shire counties. A lot of talk about transport services to London, but if you look at the ticket purchases, there are not that many people coming from London to the event. It's much more from the Shire counties and from the region. This diagram is in the Games Transport Plan. It sets out by venue all the different options for transport to those venues. And there are, as you can see, multiple options for most venues, depending upon their location and proximity to public transport, existing public transport. We're putting on a lot of additional bus shuttles, and there is cycling facilities at every venue. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a journey planner, which is live and has been for some time now. And from that, we're starting to gather more information about how people are travelling based on how they are searching on the journey planner. So at the moment, in terms of people looking at the journey planner, 71% are planning to come by public transport, 19% driving, 5% cycling, 5% walking, that sort of order. Now, it's not an exact science, this, but that gives us a good indicator as to whether we've got our array of transport options correctly balanced. And at the moment, there's nothing that's concerning us in that regard. There's a communication program that's going out to ticket holders. It seems to be running quite late. It goes out from the organising committee and tickets haven't yet been released, but they will be shortly. And of course, critical to our Games Transport Plan and the public transport nature of the Games is that there is public transport free for ticket holders on the day of their event within the West Midlands region. Cycling provision, we've put quite a bit of effort in here to make sure that there is as good a provision and encouragement as possible for people to cycle to events. So there is secure and free and staffed cycle parking at every venue. We've got a West Midlands cycle hire offer of 2 free 30-minute cycle hire rides per day to try and encourage people to use cycle hire. And we're hoping that might provide some legacy for the cycle hire scheme as well. And we'll be setting up various what we're calling virtual docks at venues to try and make sure that the destination of the ride, and there is a docking station when you get to the venue, the destination matches people's needs. There's quite a substantial amount of park and ride and park and walk being provided. So for all that, this is a public transport Games. We want it to be as environmentally friendly as possible. We do need to provide quite a substantial amount of park and ride. So there's 14,000 spaces being provided across the event, particularly for Alexander Stadium, Coventry Stadium and Sandwell Aquatics, but also for some of the more minor venues. And of course, there are NEC car parks that we will utilise for the NEC. There is strengthening of the rail and bus network, but there are limits, particularly on rail, to what can be done. So we do need to utilise park and ride and park and walk as well. The other big area of activity for us is around traffic management. CFWM has taken the lead, working with all of the local highway authorities and national highways to work through and put in a comprehensive traffic management arrangement. It is a highly congested road network in the West Midlands, and we do need to try and balance the movements of the Games family and spectators alongside business as usual residents and business users. We've established what we know as the Games Route Network, which is the network of roads that connects the athlete and Games family accommodation with the venues. So those are the routes that the athlete shuttle buses will run on, for instance. We're putting in place local traffic management around each of the venues, what we know as LATMPs, with vehicle checkpoints. This is to make sure, one, that the venues can operate efficiently, and two, that local residential streets are protected from spectator parking and workforce parking in their streets. So it's to try and ensure that people don't drive to the event and don't create congestion around the venues and within the local residential network. We've got a number of city centre transport hubs that will be operating shuttle services which need traffic management for them. The park and ride sites obviously need traffic management. And we've worked very closely with Birmingham City Council and other local authorities around their traffic signal, UTC and general network management arrangements to make sure that we keep the road network moving as freely and as efficiently as we possibly can during the games.
Graham, can I just interrupt you there?
Sure.
So I think there's still quite a number of slides to go, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so because we obviously want to get questions in from members as well before the
Yeah, sure.
If I can ask you just to kind of summarise what you feel are perhaps the most important slides for this committee to be able to ask questions on.
Well, I suspect, things like readiness and contingency planning is probably uppermost in people's minds. I can flip forward to the slide on the rail contingency plan, because I'm sure you're aware there was a strike announcement yesterday for the day before the game starts. Shall I move forward to that slide?
Yes, please.
Bear with me. So this was the residual risks that we have particularly on our radar. Congestion on the road network will always be there. There's a high demand and an extraordinary use of the road network during a games of this sort. So that work will be ongoing and will be managed via the Regional Transport Coordination Centre. But in terms of rail resilience, there are two issues. One, that the rail network generally is quite fragile still following the pandemic. There are regular cancellations of train services due to train crew availability, for instance, and that is probably at the moment, as we head into the summer period, probably getting worse rather than improving. And then, of course, there's the issue of rail industrial action. We've not been blind to any of this, and we've put in place a rail contingency plan. We have a coach network that we have set up and have just launched on the National Express website, and that's the diagram to the right-hand side here. So those are coaches, scheduled coach services that are being put in place based around that map I showed earlier as to where people are travelling from, to make sure that if people were going to use the rail network and feel uncomfortable, or there is a rail strike, then there is another option to use coach services. So that's in place. Also in place, we have 169 buses as a contingency fleet, which we will deploy based on need, judged operationally via the RTCC on the day, or if we have warning of a rail strike, as we've had for the one on the 27th, that we can deploy with 2 weeks notice to try and mitigate as far as possible the impact of those actions. We will never be able to mitigate everything. The whole plan was predicated on 40% of workforce and spectators travelling by rail. But what we can do is make sure that one, we've communicated well with people to make sure that they understand the current situation, and two, we've provided as many alternatives as we can for them to travel, be they additional park and ride sites and services using the contingency bus fleet, or be they coach services, as the diagram shows there. And the table to the left-hand side there is our monitoring that we're doing. It is complex. We've got 3 different unions balloting and those unions are dispersed across the transport operators who are down the left-hand side. So, you know, the red boxes down the middle of the RMT, we know their situation, and it's the RMT that have announced action on the 27th. ASLEV, the drivers are critical. They're down the left-hand side at the moment. We don't have any suggestion of strike action during the games from ASLEV. And on the right-hand side is the TSSA, who tend to be the management grades, but also critically some of the signallers as well, or the contingency signallers. So we're keeping a very close watch on what's happening with the rail industry. And like I say, we've got assets to deploy as and when we know where the problems might be. Shall I pause there for questions on that aspect?
Helpful, thank you. So do I have any questions from anybody about this particular issue on risk management? Councillor Waters and then Councillor Sims.
First of all, I'd like to ask, as part of it is being done in Cannock Chase, what public transport has been put on to actually take people from Birmingham and surrounding areas into Cannock Chase? And the second one was, you said there's 69 extra, surplus stroke extra vehicles, stroke buses that are actually being put on to for the games. Where are these? What company is actually facilitating these? And do we have any idea if these are being taken off other routes, so as the other routes are going to be reduced?
Okay. So Cannock Chase, we're running a shuttle bus from Stafford town centre up to Cannock Chase, and the free public transport offer will get you to Stafford, assuming that there is a rail service running. If there is no rail service, we will have some difficulty servicing Cannock Chase from Birmingham city centre, but we will be looking at the ticket holders' postcode detail and seeing, you know, what volume of people do we expect to be travelling from Birmingham, or whether they'll be travelling more locally from the Stafford area. There is also a significant park and walk facility at Cannock Chase by the event, which has been used for previous events there. So that is a further option for people. But the main public transport service is a shuttle bus from Stafford town centre. In relation to the 169 buses, we set in place a procurement for these when we knew there was going to be some risk of rail industrial action, and of course so did lots of other people who also have need for buses in relation to rail industrial action. So they are coming from all corners of the country. I think we've got about 15 different suppliers, and it's being coordinated by a consultancy team that we've brought in to do that coordination of activity for us. They're all bus experts who will help us with the deployments, will help us with the coordination of it, and make sure that all those 15 companies have the same package of driver training and familiarisation once they hit the region. They will arrive on the 25th, so they are being brought in just for the specific period of the games itself. They'll arrive on the 25th. There's training and familiarisation for them from the 26th and 27th, and they would be deployed from the 28th. There are one or two local firms. We were keen to make sure that local firms had that opportunity, but we do not believe this is being dragged or drawn from existing services in the West Midlands, and there should be no impact upon business as usual as a result.
Can I just ask very quickly in relation to that? Are these companies supplying the drivers for these buses, or are they going to be sourced locally?
The drivers come with the bus.
Right, that's fine.
So we've got about 130 drivers and about 80 supervisors and ground staff who are all being provided as part of the package. And that's been one of the issues. We have to then provide accommodation for about 230 people in the region. So we've called on accommodation that the organising committee have had provisionally procured. 100 will be in Birmingham and 130 will be in Coventry.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Sims next.
Good morning. Part of my question was asked by Councillor Waters anyway, but the next one was more of a comment really around the Svenic Aquatic Centre. I know there's a lot of work being done there basically because obviously it's a highly residential area. Just keeping fingers crossed for a lot of people that the residents aren't blocked in and different things. So I know in Sandwell we are working pretty close and well with the residents to ensure that that potentially doesn't happen. So here, that's one of the questions, and the next one was just a comment. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want
me to respond to that?
If you've got any comment to make.
Well, only in that we had the test event on the 21st of May at the Aquatic Centre, and we learnt a lot from that, and it will be improved. In terms of the residential parking issue, it didn't work particularly well on the test event, but you know, that's the nature of test events. We learnt from that, and there's a shuttle service operating from the Hawthorns up to Sandwell Aquatics for the event itself.
Thank you. And Councillor McGarrity.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Graham. It was very comprehensive. I'm looking at Wolverhampton trams because I noticed you put, you know, there will be a tram facility in Wolverhampton, which I'm really pleased about, and that's working. But unfortunately, it's not actually tied in with the train station, and that's a big disappointment. Do you have any update on that, please?
Only in that will be the situation at games time. We'll be ensuring that there is wayfinding between tram and rail, and we are putting in accessible access assistance for people if people have issues traversing between the two. But yeah, that is the situation that will prevail at games time.
Because we were assured that it would actually be completed, and it's obviously not, which is a big disappointment, especially people coming into the area, going to West Park to watch the cycling and whatever. So I'm just sort of making a comment, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think Councillor McGarrity, it might be worth just commenting that I've asked for a review of the transport arrangements to come to a later committee, so we can review how things worked, where the issues were, and things like you're raising may well come out at that point as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lal.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Graham. I have two questions. One is this alternative transport arrangements due to rail strike. Has that been already budgeted for, and who picked the cost for the alternative transport? That's one. Secondly, in Perry Bar, we have the Birmingham wholesale market, and most of the independent shops depend on doing the buying from the Birmingham wholesale market, and the restaurants also depend on buying from the wholesale markets. So during the games, have you made sure that there's access to the wholesale markets for these small shopkeepers?
Yeah. Okay, if I cover the costs first. So the funding for all of the games operations that I've described, except for the contingency planning, is part of the funding agreement between the organising committee and West Midlands Combined Authority. So it's funded through the organising committee. In terms of the contingency plan, that again is funded, the funding is coming through the organising committee, but it's been provided for by government. So it's not falling, just to reassure you, it's not falling to the combined authority.
Sorry.
Is that?
Carry on, sorry.
Okay. In terms of Perry Bar, there's a huge amount of work gone in to make sure that businesses and residents are fully aware of the arrangements, the road restrictions, etc. I am absolutely certain that the wholesale market has been spoken to at length. I don't have the detail to hand. There is a presence in the one-stop shop in centre this week, all week through to Sunday, to answer questions. There's letters been dropped through letterboxes of all residents and businesses. There's been drop-in sessions. All residents and businesses, if they are within the restricted areas, can apply for local area parking permits and access permits so that they can get through the vehicle permit checkpoints easily. So I don't foresee any problems with the wholesale market and access to it. But if you do have some specific concerns from anybody, then perhaps let me know and we'll pick that up.
Change my comment. The wholesale market caters for not only Birmingham, but some businesses come from outside of Birmingham as well. So what we make sure that businesses do have access to the wholesale market. I mean, for the residents will be given the information about the permits and the access to through. So but businesses outside, they would know that they won't have any issues getting to the wholesale markets.
But they shouldn't, and the communication has been that if the ideal is if people have got a local access permit, but if they are visitors from outside the area, if they're delivery drivers, etc., then obviously if it's DPD or Amazon or whatever, they won't be able to pre-order a local access permit. What they need to do is just be sure that they've got some proof on them on a mobile phone or in a delivery docket or something that they have business beyond the vehicle permit check, and they should be allowed through. So the stewards that will be operating the permit checkpoints are trained firstly to look for a local area permit, and secondly to check to see if people have a legitimate reason to be travelling through. They're not only when you get very close to the venues are they security checkpoints. They're mostly traffic management checkpoints to try and reduce the amount of background traffic and reduce the amount of parking in side streets and such like. So the stewards have got discretion to allow people through if it's clear that there is a good reason for them to go through and pass the permit checkpoints. So I don't think there will be a problem. With all of these things, it's always the first 24 hours when permit checkpoints go in and that sort of thing, traffic management goes in, where we might come across some issues. But I'm confident that the staff are properly trained, we've got the proper plan in place, people have been talked to, and if there are problems in the first 24 hours, we'll iron them out quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not very clear. What I'm saying, have you been talking to the wholesale market if all these access issues to the market?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Councillor McCarthy.
On the flagship hydrogen bus fleet, I take it's business as usual with that fleet now. Can you confirm that you have adequate guaranteed fuel supplies to cover the gains period? That the hydrogen supplies, that there's a full that the critical spares list for the vehicles is fully populated, and that the support staff are fully trained.
I can't give that guarantee, I'm afraid, Councillor. That's the hydrogen fleet's not part of the games fleet, but I can certainly go back and check. I would be amazed if they've not put those preparations in place, but I can certainly go back and check.
It sounds a little bit like a typical characteristic of something that's underneath the radar that no one could be saying anything about, and just need to be certain that we're not going to be tripped up by something we're not aware of at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Do I have any other questions from anybody? So in terms of the slides still to go, do you have any more still to go? Because it's now 25 to, so
Well,
do need to be moving on.
yeah, and there were more slides, but yeah, maybe best if we just take questions if anybody's got any further questions. The only things I was going to go through was just what the command and control structure was, which is basically it's all for transport. It's all based around the 6th floor, the RTCC at Summer Lane. And I was just going to mention the fact that the opening ceremony is probably our biggest challenge when we've got the highest number of people moving and the highest number of dignitaries and such like. So we've got a lot of focus on the 28th of July for the opening ceremony. But again, like I mentioned, the test event at the Aquatics, we've got 2 dress rehearsals, one on the 24th and one on the 26th. And, you know, we expect that any issues that are part of the ceremony itself or part of the transport arrangements will be ironed out during those dress rehearsals.
So I have any other questions from the committee in relation to those 2 particular issues?
Okay.
That's the last.
So again, we wanted these kind of games to be most environmentally friendly and most green, and I'm going to meet that target with all these things happening at the moment last minute.
So, well, in terms of being the most friendly, that often comes down to the number of volunteers and the training the volunteers have had. We're putting out 200 people from TFWM. We've got volunteers as part of that, people who want to be out there and show the face of TFWM and show the region off to good effect. I think the nature of the Commonwealth Games will be it will come across as a friendly games. In terms of its green credentials, what has been committed to is that the firstly the games will be carbon neutral in legacy. We can't take out all of the, it's not a net zero games, clearly. 58% of the carbon footprint comes from spectator transport, people travelling to and from the event, which is why we're trying to make sure that there's as much as possible done for cycling and walking and for public transport. There is also a carbon calculator within the journey planner so that people can choose, if they wish to, the most carbon beneficial mode of transport. But what will happen, there's been calculation done beforehand as to the likely carbon footprint. There'll be a calculation done afterwards on the carbon footprint for the games, and then there will be an offset of that carbon footprint via projects that follow on after the games, which are funded via the organising committee. The principal tool there is tree planting, and people will probably have seen the publicity around the microforests, the 72 microforests that have been planted, and the 2,022 acres of forest that is being planned post game. So I think there is a lot of scrutiny on the environmental side of the games, and as much as being done as possible to reduce the carbon footprint and the environmental impacts. But what carbon footprint there is will then, when I say, be offset post games.
I mean, I
don't know if that gives you confidence, but that there is a legacy plan as well that has just been released, which sets all this out, which we can provide a link for if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful, thank you. And I guess the the issues around carbon footprint, if we've had to bring in over 100 additional buses, then there's going to be quite a significant impact in terms of the calculation of the carbon footprint, and then the mitigations that are going to be required in order to get to the net zero legacy.
Yeah, and I think Chair, it will be something that this committee might want to keep under scrutiny. Is, has that offsetting been properly carried out post games?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we'll definitely pick up in the report back in, I think it's coming to November's committee, so we will definitely pick that up there. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank everybody for their questions on that. I'm going to move on now because time is getting short, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the work programme, which is just for noting. It is worth just noting to people that transport approvals that up to 20 million will now be presented to Investment Board, not CA Board. So in terms of looking at the work plan, we're going to have to make sure that we monitor what's coming forward to Investment Board so that we pick that up. Also to let members know that we have a mayoral Q&A session on policy in October, and we have a budget Q&A in December, and TSSC members will be invited along to those and also to the workshops that precede both of those meetings. Right, at this point we have the exclusion of the public and the press to take the confidential item. I think we only have Barbara online. I can ask Debbie to leave the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Satish has asked me to remember